Holy crap.
Holy shit. Holy shit.
Wow.
I told you.
We're back in Kentucky for day 2 of Triple Barrel Social, and today we're doing a meetup game. We've got 1-3 table, 2-5 table. Me and Jesse are going to be switching off throughout the day. I'm excited to see how these guys play and what it's like over here on the East Coast in the middle of Kentucky. I'm at the 1-3 table first, and I'm buying in for $500. It only takes one hand for me to learn a little something about how they play here in Kentucky. In this one, I opened the hijack with ace-8 of diamonds to $10, and just the big blind comes along. So heads up, the dealer puts out the ace-queen for 2-spade flop. So we flop top pair, medium-ish kicker, and the big blind just leads right into me for $15. So let's play a multiple choice game for this villain's hand. That's relatively large compared to the size of the pot. So I'm not gonna fold. I don't wanna raise. That just leaves call. On the turn comes another 4 pairing the board, and big blind does not slow down, but this time he goes smaller. He only goes $20, so I consider this a very easy call. The river is a 9 of clubs, pretty much a brick, and again, he goes $20. So each time his bet size compared to the pot size gets smaller and smaller. But once again, I really don't see a point of raising, so I just flick in the call, and I want you guys to guess what he has. Yep, if you guys guessed pocket jacks, you got it right. So if you play low stakes and you see donk leads, this is kind of what you can expect them to show up with most of the time. They either have second pair or a bad top pair. In this case, my opponent led into me 3 times with pocket jacks. I wouldn't be too worried about them betting big on flops. I've seen people go even larger than the pot on flops with their donk leads and not really show up with anything by the river. Just pay attention to their turn and river sizing, because that usually gives away the strength of their hand.
I'm starting out the day at the 2-5 table with a buy-in of $1,000. So in one of my very first hands at the table, the button raises it up to $20, which is the size he's been making it. And I'm in the big blind with ace-king offsuit. I pop it up to $80. Now the button makes it $150, which is a really small re-raise considering that we're $1,000 deep. He's also come off as a fairly careful player so far, so this raise size is one of 2 things. It's either a hand that decided to re-raise but is a little scared to do so something weak like ace-jack offsuit, or it's something really, really strong, basically aces or kings, which is kind of hard to have because I've got an ace and a king in my hand. Either way, I'm calling. I'm not looking to re-raise and put all my chips in the middle with ace-king, and I'm definitely not folding at this point. So we take a flop, and it's a massive one. Ace-king-5 with 2 spades. So we have top 2 and a backdoor flush draw. I check to him, and he checks back. So between the small re-raise and the check back, I'm more confused than a chameleon in a bag of Skittles. I think I just throw these jokes in there so I can see Ashley's reaction in the video. In all seriousness though, this check feels a lot like a trap. I guess it could be something like ace-jack that decided to 4-bet and now it wants to play a little bit of pot control, but in my experience, people don't like to check back on these boards and look weak when they have a 1-pair hand and potentially have to face some really big bets because of that. I don't think if he was bluffing pre-flop that he would stop bluffing on this sort of flop. So now the turn is the 8 of spades, and I make the nut flush draw to go with my top 2 pair. I decide to bet really small here and end up firing 100 into a pot that's just over $300. He's going to have some hands like pocket jacks with a spade or king queen that I don't want to let him off the hook that easily. If I make a big bet, those hands can pretty happily fold, but for this price, I think they're going to put more money in the pot. And now he re-raises to $500. Okay, this whole line looks incredibly strong to me, but the question is, how strong exactly is it? If he has pocket aces, I'm in pretty bad shape. If he has pocket kings, yeah, I'm not doing great, but I do have a lot of outs. If he's got ace king, I have it in really bad shape because we have the same hand, but I'm free rolling with my flush draw. So I go into the tank for a few seconds, but I ultimately decide that there's just a way higher likelihood of him having ace-king than aces or kings. So I push my stack into the pot, and he nearly beats me in there. and shows me the bad news. He has the other 2 kings, and I am pretty far behind. But the river is no help. And I start this game out stuck $1,000 at 2-5 in the first 17 or so minutes.
Folds around to me in the cutoff, and I have 8-6 of clubs, so I raise it up to $10, and the small blind just min re-raises to $20. He does start on a really short stack, but when he goes this small, I'm thinking, talk me into it.
Heads up.
So I flick in the call.
Ashley, I wouldn't be talking like that. You're going to get a reputation of girls to be talked into things. So, just saying. That's twice now.
Off to a flop, we see King 6, 2 diamonds. This is the dream flop, so now we just have to have our fingers crossed to hope that he has a king. Small blind continues for $29. Obviously, we want to keep in all of his bluffs. He doesn't have much more behind that we can get in on the turn, so I just call. The turn is a jack of diamonds. Not that great, but he only has like $37 behind, so we get it in on the turn. When the river comes an 8 of spades, we've locked it up, and he reveals that he had ace king. So unlucky there. And with that, I start racking up my chips because it's my turn to take on the 2-5 players.
Our second hand starts out with under the gun limping, and I come along with pocket 7s in the hijack. The cutoff limps as well, and then the small blind puts in a pretty big raise to $35. Under the gun calls, and I come along as well. I think the small blind looks pretty strong here, so I'm mainly trying to flop a set at this point. Our wishes are not quite granted on the 6-5-3 flop.
Hold on. Can we all just take a moment to appreciate the fact that Jesse just filmed a flop? He picked up his camera, you guys, and filmed a poker hand. Yay!
But we do make a straight draw, and this is definitely a very above average flop for us. The small blind continues betting, putting out $70, which is again a fairly large bet. And when under the gun folds, I decide to just call. I kind of feel like maybe he's going larger because he likes his hand a lot. And even if that's not true, I think that calling's perfectly fine here. I think folding is out of the question at this point on this board, and raising feels a little too much like we're overplaying our hand against a bet size that could be representing a ton of strength. So we flick the chips in, and the turn is the 8 of hearts. So now we have the full open-ended straight draw. He continues with this large betting pattern and puts out $180. Again, raising might be an option. I think that if we do raise, it represents a ton of strength on a board where we could have all of the sets and potentially some straights. If he has an overpair, it puts him in a rough spot. However, as a general life rule, I don't usually try to get people to fold overpairs in 3-bet pots where they're getting a pretty good price versus my jam. That's a rule that has served me really well so far. And I'm not convinced that this is a situation where I should be breaking that rule. So I eventually put in the call. I do have some nefarious ideas building in the back of my mind where I potentially bluff him if the river is a heart or a deuce. And the river is a heart, but it is the best kind of heart, the 9 of hearts giving me the straight. Now my opponent checks over to me, which is a very good idea when the board runs out this poorly. I have to decide how much to bet here. And because the backdoor flush draw got there as well as the straight draw, I think it wants to be quite small. The problem here is that given this run out, it's actually going to be very hard for me to find a bluff. Everything that I've been calling with up to this point either made a straight, made a flush, has pretty good showdown value, or was already a really strong hand like a set. So the only real natural bluff that I could come up with on the fly is pocket 4s, or maybe I get real creative with a hand like ace 5 suited. And one thing that I've learned is that if it's really hard for you to find a bluff, it's probably a good idea to bet pretty small. At least that way you can convince your opponent to call because they're getting laid such a great price. So I bet $200 into a pot of $615, and he tanks and tanks and eventually comes up with a fold. If he had an overpair here, he played his hand perfectly versus my hand. So while I'm obviously psyched to win the pot, I can't help but feel like he had something along the lines of, I don't know, pocket queens. And I just got completely owned by the way that this hand played out.
First thing I noticed about this 2-5 table, it's very limpy. There's a lot of limpers happening. People just want to see flops. So that's the case in this hand. Under the gun limps for $5. Same with under the gun 1. And it's around to me in the hijack with ace jack of hearts. We obviously want to thin the field. So I raise it up to $20, which I would probably make $25 instead. But anyway, I make it $20, and the cutoff thinks about it for a second before saying,
I go back and watch a YouTube video quick.
okay. And then he folds. Under the gun is the only one to call, so heads up, which is perfect. We see the ace 8-7 all diamond flop. Under the gun checks it to me, and I could go either way on a monotone flop. Obviously, we have top pair, so we could go for some value here. You do want to mix in some checkbacks with top pair. So that's what I decided to do here and check it back. The turn is the 10 of hearts. And now my opponent leads for $20. I can afford that, so I toss it in. And the river is another 10 and another diamond. 4 to a flush. There's straight possibilities out there. I don't know. This doesn't feel great when he leads $40 into me.
I don't like that one.
And after mulling it over out loud a bit,
All right. I don't know.
I end up making the fold. 2 people have just come back from a smoke break, so they've paid dead blinds, and an under the gun player limps once again. So there's a bunch of dead money out there, and I look down at ace king offsuit under the gun 1. So I'm gonna raise it up on the larger side and make it $30 to go, and 3 people come along. So 4 ways. Ace key off, out of position against everyone, doesn't feel great, but then we flop ace jack 5 with 2 hearts. So we flop top pair, and on an ace high board, if I didn't really have a strong hand, I would be checking. So I'm going to be checking on this type of board a lot. So I check, low jack checks, and the cutoff, thankfully, throws out a bet of $40. Button folds, and I think I could consider raising here, but in the moment, I just called. The low jack is out of there, and continuing on with my deception, we both see the 7 of spades on the turn. I check it again to the cutoff. He's only got $100 behind, and he basically snap goes all in. So we're gonna make this call. Very happy to have laid a successful trap. And as soon as I make the call, my opponent says, uh-oh.
Uh-oh? You said uh-oh? I like to hear uh-oh.
And the river is a 9 of spades. So after he says, uh-oh, I just show my hand. So to, save him the embarrassment of having to flip over his bluff, he tosses it in the muck. And now we're up $400 in just 1 hour. One day soon, this theater back here is going to be the home to the Triple Barrel live stream / final table if you guys are lucky enough to make one of those.
After losing a bunch of pots where I may or may not have been supposed to just fold pre-flop, I find myself peak stuck for this session. At which point there is a straddle, an early position limp, and I look down at king deuce of diamonds in the hijack and say, well, I can't get unstuck by folding, and I flick in the call as well. The cutoff also limps and the straddle checks, so we go 4 ways to the flop. And what a flop it is. Queen 6-3 all diamonds. I flop the second nut flush. It checks over to me and I decide to check as well. So far, the cutoff has been really aggressive. He's been betting a lot of flops and he's been betting a really big size. So instead of betting some smaller size that I might make it, I want to give him the opportunity to do exactly that. Unfortunately, he very quickly, very confidently checks behind. Well, that's unfortunate. The turn is the jack of spades and it checks to me again. At this point, I think the only real option is betting, and I decide to bet on the big size, around 3/4 of the pot. The cutoff quickly folds, which I guess is to be expected when he checks back the flop, and the straddle basically snap calls our bet. This is a really interesting position to have called me on the turn because he checked back pre-flop, so he could have any 2 cards, which means he has tons of pair plus draw type of hands on this board texture. Under the gun folds, and the river is a big fat blank, the 4 of clubs. The straddle checks to me, and I decide to bet right around the size of the pot, $125. Now, I could go a lot bigger on this river, maybe something like 175 or 250, something along those lines, but I do want to make it a little easier for my opponent to call when they have something like one pair and a diamond. I think those hands are very reasonable bluff catchers, and I don't want a size so large that they find a really easy excuse to just put their hand in the muck. And after tanking for a little while on the river, my opponent does find the call. I think if he had something like two pair or better, he would have just flicked the chips in really fast. So I'm very happy with the size I picked on the river and just generally how the pot went overall.
So I'm feeling great when I head back over to the 1-3 table when a series of hands happen that send me into a downward emotional spiral. It starts off when somebody opens, I look down at the best hand possible, and obviously I'm gonna 3-bet. So I 3-bet to 30 bucks, they fold. Same thing happens one orbit later. Somebody opens, I look down at aces, I 3-bet, and they fold. My next 3-bet, I was just like, okay, I'm gonna have a little semi-bluff, and when cutoff opens, I look down at king-queen offsuit in the small blind. I'm like, I'm going for it. Everybody keeps folding to my 3-bets, so I 3-bet, and of course they call. End up losing that pot. Then I look down at king-queen suited, again, small blind versus button. I 3-bet. This one's a value hand, so I'm fine with them calling against my 3-bet, but we do end up losing that pot as well. So I'm just a little bit frustrated. The 3-bet spots are going the exact opposite way I want them to. People are folding when I want them to call, and vice versa. I'm giving you all of that background because then somebody opens in the low jack and I look down at pocket kings on the button. And I hate to admit this, you guys, but like I said, I was feeling very frustrated that every time I 3-bet the best hand ever, people were folding, and I just call this time. Do not try this at home. This is terrible. Don't do this ever. I let my emotions get the best of me, and I may or may not be about to pay for it. Okay, so now Big Blind is getting a good price and decides to come along as well. So 3-handed, let's just pray that no funny business happens post-flop. Flop comes out ace, 7, 6, 2 hearts. About the worst flop for pocket kings ever, especially when the big blind is in there. But surprisingly, both opponents check to me. So I'm gonna try to charge one pair holdings that have draws to go with it because there are a ton out there. So I bet $15 into 31 and the big blind folds, just the low jack comes along. Heads up, the turn is a 4 of diamonds. Low jack checks again, and yes, there is a 4 card straight out there, but I don't think that in the low jack, people are opening a lot of hands that have a 5 in them. So I think it's a pretty safe card if I thought the flop was okay. Yes, I might be value owning myself, but for the same reason that I bet the flop, I bet the turn for $30. Just trying to charge one pair holdings that also have a draw, like flushes or straight draws. And again, low jack calls. The river is a deuce of diamonds and the low jack checks. Now, this is a really key decision point here. I don't know if I'm value owning myself if I bet once again, but the reason that I decide to bet for value, pretty thin value, is that my opponent was pre-flop raiser and just checked this flop and check called the turn. I think if they had a set or they had a straight or anything stronger than one pair, they would have at least considered raising on either the flop or the turn. And since he didn't, I felt pretty safe trying to squeeze out one more value bet from, maybe pocket tens, maybe ace 8, something like that, that decided to pot control and just check call and check call again. You've probably noticed this if you play lower stakes, that a lot of people don't get value themselves. They'd rather play a more passive post-flop game. All of that to say, I put out another bet of $50, just keeping my fingers crossed that I'd get called by one of those hands that was curious. Instead, my opponent snap calls and says that he has a straight. What? First of all, wouldn't expect somebody to be opening the low jack with this type of hand. So that just goes to show people are way looser with their pre-flop opening ranges at lower stakes. And he, like I said, was just very passive with his draw. When he made the straight, I was not expecting him to just call on the turn. So that one is a bit surprising. Kind of totally torched it in this hand just because a couple of people folded to my previous 3-bets with aces. Just goes to show live poker is a very small sample size. Don't make emotional plays. Just play your A game. Don't worry if they fold a million times in a row because this all could have been avoided if I just 3-bet pre. Yes, I would have gotten a fold, but I could have just 3-bet this pre, taken down my nice little $10 and moved on to the next hand. Instead, I lose over $100 for no reason at all. A quick shout out to John, who is the nicest person I've ever met, probably while playing poker. He loves vlogs, he loves poker. Unfortunately, I cursed him and filmed his all-in, hoping that he was gonna win a huge pot on the vlog, and instead, this happened.
We're getting John's all in on the vlog, that's for sure.
This is the winning hand right here.
This one too, I'm sorry.
Guaranteed. Yeah, I called the raise. I called the
Guaranteed?
raise with that hand, but I'm not calling this all in.
All right,
Snap call?
called.
He announced snap call too. I made the
Oh,
raise.
he's got
I
ace.
don't think it's
Spade?
Oh no, it's It's been a frustrating few hours for me at this 1-3 table, and I'm just hoping to wrap things up on a high note. It's almost midnight here, so this is gonna be our last orbit. In this hand, it folds around to the small blind, who only has 140 bucks in his stack, and he makes it $10 to go. Well, I'm just gonna keep hammering away with these 3 bets, and I make it $30. He makes the call, and heads up, we see the 9-9 deuce 2 club flop. At first, you might think that this is a slam dunk C-bet after he checks it over to me because, you know, it's a paired board and it's got a flush draw. We could get called by a lot of worse hands. And you may be right, but I guess I just decided to check back because the 9 in particular being the paired card is better for the person who called, because I'm not going to really be 3-betting the big blind here with a lot of 9s in my hand. So it is a little bit better for him. The turn is a king of diamonds. So this is an interesting one. Small blind raises and calls my 3-bet from the blinds pre-flop, especially at a 1-3 table where people tend to be on the more passive side. I think that he's narrowed his range down to, you know, good ace-x suiteds, good suited broadways and suited connectors, and some pocket pairs. So on the king, obviously he could have made top pair, but he also has all these other hands that are flush draws or straight draws with those Broadway holdings, or he just has a pair from the get-go that's lower than the 9. When the small blind checks to me again, my decision to bet or check depends on if I think he will lead his draws on this turn. If I think that he's gonna lead the draws on this turn, then when he checks over to me, I should probably just check back, because now the majority of things that I'm ahead of no longer exist in his range because he would have bet them. But we're at a passive sort of 1-3 table. I can't be assured that everyone will lead out with a draw that doesn't have any showdown value. Sometimes they will check a draw, I think, and just decide to try to get there or bluff river. The other portion of his range that would check to me is 4s through 8s. Maybe if he spiked a king on the turn with all of those king high holdings from that pre-flop range, those might check to me as well, just being a little sneaky. And obviously all of those holdings beat me. I land on betting $30. I'm just not convinced that he's going to bet every single time he has a straight and flush draw. And I think that I can also get check called by worse ace highs, especially if he has a club or diamond draw to go with it. So I land on betting $30. He makes the call. And now on the river, we hit an ace. It's the ace of diamonds though. So the backdoor flush draw does come in. And now he checks again. Our decision is whether or not we think that those kings that hit a turn top pair are gonna call. And I think that I could probably get called by that. So I throw out 30 bucks just to entice him. I try to make it extra small just to not scare him out of there, but he does land on a fold. That is how we end the night. It was a bumpy ride. We had some good moments over there at the 2-5 table, but other than that, I just lost basically all of my profit back by losing with those kings and a couple of other 3-bet pots that didn't go my way. So we only ended up $45 after 5 hours of play. Not my best work. I did not play my A game, that's for sure, but we did have a really nice time here. So there's that.
At this point in the night, I find myself very stuck for a 2-5 game, down about $1,500, but there are a lot of opportunities to win that back because the whole table is straddling to 10 and we are sometimes putting on the $20 and even $40 straddle. So this is a huge game for 2-5 and we've certainly pulled it out of the muck. In this hand, there's a $20 straddle on, EP limps, and another early position player raises it up to $110. It folds around to me in the big blind and I've got pocket aces and $580. So I decided to just go all in right now. I thought there was a really high likelihood that my opponent wouldn't fold. And I was not wrong. And he asked me if
Did I run into aces again?
You did.
Did?
Sorry. Yeah.
Damn it.
5 what? 79.
Golly.
well,
How did I just get crushed by
Aces.
Twice. I didn't, the way you said it, I didn't even want to say yes, but if I don't say yes, I'm like slow rolling you.
The board does not help him, and we reduce our losses to only a little under $1,000. I think in general, the games were really good. The players were by no means pushovers. A lot of them drove a long way to get there and came to play. But everyone put in straddles and blind raises, and we all basically just pitched in to get the game as loosened up as possible. And honestly, I had a great time gambling it up with everyone.
Overall, I would say the cash games here are tighter than Texas and LA, but way looser than Las Vegas. Doesn't take much. And that's just because they play straight up, no limit hold'em here. There's not a lot of bomb pots or high variance games that people are playing in between. So if that's more your speed, this place might just be for you. Next on the vlog, we're back on home turf at the Wynn in Las Vegas, where a bunch of big stacks are colliding in the cash games.